I arrived at the hospice just before sundown, the last shred of gold on the horizon bleeding into the color of rust as I parked my car in the gravel lot. The building sat there against the fading light like something older than its own foundation. Too still, too watchful. It wasn't large, 3 stories tall, built of pale bricks and accented by old iron fire escapes, but it had the kind of presence that made you hesitate before stepping inside. I told myself it was only nerves. Everyone feels unsettled on their first night shift. At least, that's what I repeated in my head as I adjusted the strap of my bag and crossed the lot. The air smelled faintly of dust and rain, even though the sky had been dry all day. The front. Doors creaked open when I pulled them, their hinges long overdue for oil. Inside, the scent of antiseptic hit me immediately, sharp, clinical, layered over something fainter, but much harder to ignore. A sweetness, almost like fruit gone soft. I tried not to think about what it really was. The lobby lights flickered once before stabilizing. The walls were painted a dull cream color chipped at the edges, and the tiled floor reflected the overhead fluorescence in broken streaks. There was no sound apart from the faint hum of the machines deeper in the hallways, the kind of steady drone that made silence seem heavier. I walked to the nurse's station half expecting to find it empty. Instead, a woman sat behind the desk, scribbling notes with a pen that barely scratched the paper. Her hair was gray and pinned neatly back, her uniform ironed so sharply I wondered if she'd pressed it that morning. She didn't look up until I cleared my throat. "You must be the new night nurse," she said. Her voice was low, weary, but there was no warmth in it. I nodded quickly. "Yes? First shift?" Her gaze lingered on me longer than I liked, assessing, as if she were trying to measure not my competence, but my endurance. Finally, she reached into the drawer and pulled out a thin manila envelope. She slid it across the counter toward me. "Read this," she said. "Before midnight. Do not wait until later." I hesitated. "Orientation material?" Her lips twitched, but not into a smile. "Something like that." I glanced down at the envelope. It wasn't sealed. The top was folded, the edges worn, as if it had been handled too many times. I thought about opening it right there, but the woman was already standing. "My shift ends now," she said. "You'll have the place to yourself until morning. Just follow the rules." Her words lingered in the air long after she'd walked past me and pushed through the double doors that led outside. The sound of them closing echoed through the empty lobby. I was alone. The machines down the hall buzzed faintly. A clock ticked somewhere above me. I looked at the envelope again, fingers brushing the edge. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I put my bag behind the desk, settled into the chair, and took a deep breath. The building groaned as the night settled in, every pipe and beam shifting in the cold. I told myself again that I was only nervous. There was nothing strange about an old hospice creaking like that, but when I checked the hallway clock, it was already close to 11. I took the envelope and carried it into the small break room at the back of the station. The light there buzzed, louder than the others, trembling against the stained ceiling. I sat down at the small table, unfolded the flap, and pulled out the paper inside. It wasn't typed. The list had been handwritten in neat, slanted script. The ink looked faded in places as though rewritten many times. The heading at the top read simply, "Rules." Night Shifty felt my chest tighten. I scanned down the page, my eyes catching on the instructions one by one. Do not respond if you hear a patient calling your name from the hall after midnight. Cover all mirrors after 2:15 a.m. Do not take the elevator past floor 2. Floor 3 does not exist. If you see the lights flicker 3 times in a row, hide under a bed and wait. Never let anyone inside after 4 a.m., no matter how much they beg. If your reflection doesn't match, do not look at it again until sunrise. Read these rules. Every hour. They may change. I stared at the page for longer than I'd meant to, the words pressing into me with a weight I couldn't name. A prank, I thought. some kind of hazing ritual for new staff, but the handwriting was too careful, the paper too worn. And the part that unsettled me most wasn't the absurdity of the rules, it was how they felt like warnings carved from someone else's fear. I folded the paper back into the envelope and tucked it into my uniform pocket. My heart was racing, though I'd done nothing more than read. The hum of the machines seemed louder now, carrying through the halls like distant voices. I made my first round of the building, checking each patient's room. Most were asleep, their breath slow, some assisted by machines that hissed in mechanical rhythm. Room 6 held a man with thin parchment skin, his eyes closed, oxygen mask rising and falling gently. For a moment I thought I heard something beneath the hiss of his machine, a whisper, soft and deliberate. My name. I froze at the door. The list in my pocket burned against my chest. Do not respond if you hear a patient calling your name from the hall after midnight. But it wasn't midnight yet, and I wasn't in the hall. I leaned closer, listening. Nothing now but the steady breath of the machine. I forced myself back to the desk, trying to shake the chill that had crept down my spine. I checked the clock. 11:52. 8 minutes until midnight. The building groaned again as if settling deeper into the earth. The fluorescent lights dimmed for just a second, then steadied. My reflection in the darkened monitor across from me seemed to move half a beat slower than I did. By the time the clock struck 12, I was clutching the envelope like a lifeline, and that's when the whispers started again. Midnight didn't strike with a bell or chime. The clock on the wall simply shifted, one number dissolving into the next. But the moment it did, the hospice changed. The hum of the machines deepened, vibrating against the walls like a bass line, too low to hear. The air turned colder, enough that I could see my breath when I exhaled, and then from somewhere down the long hallway, I heard it again. Come here. Not loud, not even distinct, just a whisper wrapped in my name. I clutched the envelope in my pocket like a talisman. Do not respond if you hear a patient calling your name from the hall after midnight. My brain wanted to rationalize. It had to be a patient in distress, or a half-dreamed sound carried through the ducts. But the rules didn't ask me to understand. They told me what to do. So I stayed put. The whisper grew clearer, closer, soft as breath against glass. It came from the very edge of the hallway where the light didn't quite reach. My eyes strained against the shadows. The shape of a patient gown shimmered for just a moment, pale and indistinct, before vanishing into the dark. My skin prickled. I gripped the desk until my knuckles whitened. The rules weren't a prank, not unless the senior nurse had staged a full production with props and actors. And if that was true, it meant she'd gone to impossible lengths to keep the joke running, because the air around me felt wrong, heavier, like I'd walked into a storm that hadn't arrived yet. The whisper faded, swallowed by silence. The building seemed to sigh in relief. I pulled out the paper again, unfolding the creases carefully as though the words might rub off if I touched them too hard. My eyes lingered on each line. Cover all mirrors after 2:15 a.m. Floor 3 does not exist. Lights flicker 3 times. Hide. I read them twice, then a third time, until I could recite them without looking. At exactly 1 o'clock I made my second round. The rooms were unchanged. The patients slept. Their machines sang their mechanical lullabies, but something had shifted. Room 9's mirror above the sink had fogged, though the air was cold. Shapes curled in it, not quite reflections, more like shadows pressing against glass from the other side. I forced myself not to stare. The rules didn't mention mirrors until 2:15. That meant I still had time, or maybe it meant the danger had arrived early. The rules weren't explanations, they were instructions. The why didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was obedience. When I returned to the nurse's station, I found the envelope had changed. The flap, which I had tucked neatly closed, was now open. The paper lay half slid out as though someone, or something, had pulled it while I was gone. My hands trembled as I unfolded it again. The rules weren't the same. A new line had appeared, written in the same careful script, but darker, fresher. Do not let the man in the black coat speak twice. My stomach dropped. I glanced at the clock. 1:37 a.m. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, walk out the front doors, get in my car, drive away. But the thought of stepping into the night felt worse. The hospice pressed against me, but the darkness outside felt alive in ways I didn't want to imagine. So I stayed, and then came the knock, soft, deliberate, at the glass front doors. I froze. The clock read 1:41. Rule 5 didn't activate until 4 a.m. I had time. Whoever or whatever it wasn't against the rules for me to acknowledge it yet. The knock came again, louder. I forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last, until I could see the shape waiting on the other side of the glass. A man, tall, his coat long and black, frayed at the bottom. He stood too still, head slightly bowed, as though listening to something only he could hear. When his head tilted up, I caught the faint reflection of eyes too bright to belong in a human face. His mouth moved. The sound was muffled through the glass, but I understood the word perfectly. Please, one word. Not dangerous yet, I told myself. The rule was specific. Do not let him speak twice. I backed away slowly, pulse hammering in my throat. The man didn't follow. He stood there, motionless, his face barely visible through the glass. His lips didn't move again. I collapsed into the chair behind the desk, clutching the paper. My breath came shallow, ragged. The rules had kept me alive for now. At 2:15, the building itself seemed to know the hour. Every mirror shivered, surface rippling as though touched by unseen hands. I moved from room to room, draping sheets over each reflective surface until the glass was gone. My reflection fought back in one of them, grinning wide even as I kept my own face blank. I threw the sheet harder, refusing to look again. When I returned to the station, the man at the door was gone, but the rules had changed again. If you hear him upstairs, he is already inside. I stared at the words until they blurred. The air was colder now, every breath forming clouds in the dim light. Above me, the ceiling creaked, and then, faint, unmistakable, came the sound of footsteps on the third floor. The floor that did not exist. The hospice taught me quickly that silence was never truly silence. Even before the rules, before the black-coated man at the glass, before the mirrors shivered at 2:15, the quiet had been alive. The low hum of oxygen tanks, the faint whir of machines, the slow drip of IVs, all of it stitched together into a rhythm you either got used to or went mad trying. But that night, silence shifted into something else. It started around 2:40. I was halfway through a slow round, moving carefully from room to room, checking the patients without letting myself linger too long near the covered mirrors. The sheets draped over them fluttered faintly in a draft I couldn't feel. My flashlight beam skated across door frames, catching the pale sheen of linoleum. Everything was in order. Until I reached room 6. The door was ajar, just a sliver, though. I was certain I'd left it closed. I eased it open, the hinges sighing in protest. Inside, the air was thicker, warmer. The patient, a man in his 70s with an oxygen mask, lay completely still, chest rising and falling with machine-fed precision. His eyes fluttered beneath lids, but he didn't stir. That's when I heard it, a whisper, faint, drawn out, slithering, between the hisses of oxygen. At first I thought it was him. Patients talked in their sleep sometimes, caught in dream fragments. But then the words sharpened, each syllable clear, deliberate. It was my name. Spoken slowly, breath dragging across. Each letter, I froze. The rules flashed in my head. Rule 3, do not respond to voices that sound like yours. But it didn't just sound like mine. It was mine. Not an echo, not a mimic. My exact cadence. the same rasp of exhaustion clinging to my throat, the same nervous lilt, my voice crawling out of the air tube beside the patient's mouth. "Your name?" I stumbled back, hand slamming against the doorframe. The sound followed, weaving around me, too close, like someone leaning just over my shoulder. I bit down on my tongue to stop the instinct to answer. My brain screamed at me to rationalize auditory hallucination, sleep deprivation, stress-induced paranoia. Anything was better than admitting I was listening to myself speak from a dying man's bedside. The whisper grew stronger, layered, overlapping itself, like a recording caught in a loop. "Your name? Your name? Your name?" The patient's eyes opened, not fully, just a slit. The whites rolled back, unfocused, pupils swallowed in the dim. His lips didn't move beneath the oxygen mask, but still the voice came. I staggered toward the hall, every step dragging as though the air thickened around me. My heartbeat thundered, so loud it nearly drowned the whispers. Nearly. The corridor was empty when I emerged, but the sound didn't stop. It traveled with me, following along the sterile air vents, echoing faintly from the walls. "Your name? Please." It begged now. Softer, weaker, almost human, almost me. My throat burned with the effort of silence. The urge to respond, to say anything, even a single word, gnawed at me like hunger. That was the danger, wasn't it? The rules didn't warn against curiosity or fear. They warned against recognition. Once you answered, you'd be part of the dialogue. The whispers multiplied. I heard myself calling from behind other doors, from the dark bends of the hall, from the ceiling vents, always my voice, always urgent. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound burrowed past skin, vibrating in bone. When the lights flickered, once, twice, I nearly broke. But they didn't reach 3, and so I clung to the rules, forcing myself down the corridor until the voices thinned, stretched, and finally snapped into silence. Back at the station, I collapsed into the chair, clutching the envelope like scripture. For a long time, there was only the hum of machines, my breath ragged but steady, the building's pulse beneath my feet, and then faint, drifting up the stairwell from the floor that did not exist, came the whisper again. My name, drawn out, broken, carried by a voice identical to mine. The rule was clear. After 2:15, do not look into uncovered mirrors, and yet rules mean little when fatigue starts to crawl under your skin, dulling thought, blurring edges. That night, the whispers had left me drained, every nerve buzzing with leftover static. By the time I returned to my rounds, I was operating on habit alone, clinging to the routine like it could anchor me against the strangeness. But habit is dangerous here. It leads to carelessness. The hall stretched long and hollow, fluorescent lights humming above. I passed a covered mirror in the east wing, fabric sagging like a tired curtain, but at the end of the corridor, another sheet had slipped, half-torn, dangling. I should have stopped. I should have looked away. Instead, my eyes caught the glass. At first, it was just me, washed pale in the harsh light. Tired eyes, cracked lips, slouched posture. I almost laughed at how wretched I looked. But then something twitched. Not me. The reflection. It lagged. Half a heartbeat too slow, as if the mirror were buffering reality. My hand rose to adjust my badge, but in the glass the motion dragged, stuttering like a corrupted video file. I blinked hard, throat tight. The reflection blinked back, then smiled. I hadn't. It was subtle at first, a twitch at the mouth, a curl of lip. But then it widened, too wide, stretching until the gums showed. My own teeth gleamed, long and wrong in the sterile light. I stumbled back, pulse hammering, but the reflection leaned forward. The sheet fell lower, revealing more glass, more of the warped me. Its eyes glistened, catching light like wet marbles. My body was frozen, but in the mirror I moved. A tilt of the head, a jerk of shoulders. The grin widened further, and then its hand pressed against the glass from inside. I knew then I wasn't looking at myself. I was being looked at. Something in the reflection's gaze crawled through me. A weight pressed down, heavy, invasive, like I was being catalogued, studied. Every hair on my body bristled. I snapped my head away, forcing myself down the hall, but it was too late. The damage had been done. For the rest of the night the sensation clung, eyes on me, always from the glass. Each time I passed a sheet-draped mirror, I felt the reflection straining against its barrier, teeth bared just behind. The fabric. At the station, the small wall clock caught my attention. The face gleamed faintly, glass-covered. My chest seized. The reflection wasn't lagging anymore. Now it moved faster than me. When I reached for the clock to turn it away, my reflection's hand was already pressed flat against the inside, waiting. The smile widened again. I shoved the clock into a drawer and slammed it shut, but the feeling never left. All night I caught glimpses, slivers of pale grin in the gloss of IV bags and the polished surface of door handles. Not fully formed, never enough to prove it wasn't my imagination. Just flashes of movement, always a split second before or after I moved. By dawn, my nerves were shredded. I sat with my head in my hands, breathing through the nausea that came. With every tiny glint of reflective surface, the rules weren't warnings. They were barricades, and I had cracked one wide open. When I finally left the hospice, stepping into the washed-out gray of morning, I dared a glance at the rearview mirror in my car. It was covered, not by me. A white sheet had been tucked neatly. Across the glass, corners pinned like a nurse's work, and faintly, from beneath the cloth, I swore I saw the bulge of a grin pressing outward. The morning after the mirror incident, I almost convinced myself it had been exhaustion, a hallucination, maybe stress-induced. That's what I told myself as I pulled into the hospice parking lot again, the sky dimming into slate-blue dusk, but the rearview mirror was still covered, and I hadn't touched it. I thought about tearing the sheet off, just to prove to myself it was nothing, but my fingers froze halfway, and instead I left it alone. By the time I walked through the sliding hospice doors, the weight in my chest hadn't lifted. The corridors greeted me with their usual stillness, the antiseptic sting in the air, sharper tonight. The fluorescent hum seemed louder, like bees, caught in plastic. Every step echoed too long on the linoleum floor. I started my rounds, badge swiping me through the wings, counting doors the way the rules had taught me. 1, 2, 3. Keep your pace, steady. Don't linger in empty halls. When I passed room 4, I paused, not because of the patient, an old man on oxygen who rarely stirred, but because I thought I saw someone further down the hall. A woman, thin, in a hospital gown, bare feet on the floor. At first I assumed she was confused, a patient wandering out of bed. It happened sometimes, even here. I hurried after her, my shoes squeaking softly. "Ma'am?" I whispered. My voice felt too loud in the hush of the building. She didn't turn, her head tilted slightly, like she'd heard, but didn't want to acknowledge me. Her steps were deliberate, slow. The gown hung oddly on her frame, too loose at the shoulders, too short at the legs. It swayed, but not with her movement, almost as if it were moving a beat late, like fabric suspended in water. I checked the roster clipped to my cart. No female patients matched her description. Not tonight. Not in this wing. "Ma'am, wait." I tried again, picking up my pace. The woman stopped. Her head turned just enough for me to see her face in profile, and then the smile. Wide. Wider than it should have been, stretching until the skin looked strained. I froze mid-step. The fluorescent light seemed to catch in her teeth, too many of them, small and sharp like shattered porcelain. The air grew cold, sharp enough that my breath fogged faintly. Then, footsteps behind me. I spun. Sam, the orderly, rounded the corner, yawning, clipboard in hand. He looked at me, brows raised. "You good?" he asked. I whipped back to the hall. Empty. Just fluorescent buzz and sterile floor stretching ahead. I stopped myself. What could I even say? "Did you see someone walk past just now?" Sam shook his head. "No one. It's a quiet night." But it hadn't been. I could still feel the echo of her presence, the strange chill in the air. My skin prickled like something was still watching from just around the corner. Sam smirked. "You look like you saw a ghost." I didn't laugh. Later, when I passed the east wing again, I caught movement in the reflection of a glass panel in a door. Just a shimmer of white gown, a flash of that too wide smile. Gone when I turned. It was then I understood. The hospice didn't just house patients. Some of the ones who roamed here weren't ours at all, and worse. They seemed to notice me now. The rule was clear. After 3:00 a.m., never take the elevator, and yet, that night, exhaustion had sunk its claws deep. My eyelids dragged with every blink, my thoughts fuzzed around the edges. The encounter with the woman had left me rattled, but routine kept me moving. Check vitals, adjust IVs, log the times, repeat. It was during one of those endless loops that my legs betrayed me. I found myself standing in front of the elevator. Doors, the call button already glowing red beneath my finger. It took a second to register what I'd done. My stomach dropped. I snatched my hand back like the button had burned me. But the damage was done. The doors slid open with a cheerful ding, and the air that rolled out was wrong. Stale, metallic, like rust and old blood. I knew I should walk away, close the doors, turn, take the stairs. That's what the rules were for. But my body moved like it belonged to someone else, my foot stepping forward, then the other. The carpet inside was darker than it should have been, damp-looking under the flickering fluorescent bulb overhead. I pressed the button for the second floor just to reset it to make the doors close. Instead, the panel flickered, numbers jittering. Before stopping at the Parise, there was no third floor, the doors closed, the elevator jolted, and my throat tightened. The hum of the motor rose, low and strained. I braced myself against the railing as the floor shuddered beneath me, the fluorescent light above sputtering. When the doors finally opened, the breath left my chest. The hall stretched impossibly long, lined with rows of beds. Not like the patient rooms upstairs. These beds were metal, old paint peeling. They stretched into the dark on either side, lined up like an abandoned ward. The smell hit next. Copper damp fabric, something sour under. It all, like mold crawling up walls. At first I thought the beds were empty, but then my eyes adjusted. Figures lay beneath the thin sheets, still. Too still. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, the glow casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. I should have pressed the button, forced the doors closed, but something held me frozen. My breath echoed too loud in my ears, and then one of the figures sat up, not smoothly. Not like a person waking. The motion was sharp, jerking, as if pulled by invisible strings. The sheet slid down, revealing gray, mottled skin stretched tight over bones. Its eyes opened, milky white, unseeing. But its head turned toward me anyway. Then it began to move. Not walk, not stand. It dropped onto all fours, joints cracking, and started crawling toward the elevator. Fast. Too fast. The sound of its hand slapping against the linoleum was wet, sticky. Each movement closer, closer, closer. I slammed the button for the lobby. The elevator groaned in protest, lights flickering overhead. The thing's face snapped up, that milky gaze locked onto me. Its mouth opened, jaw unhinging, farther than it should, a guttural scraping sound spilling out. The doors began to close. The figure lunged, hitting the floor just outside the threshold. Its fingers clawed at the gap, nails scraping metal with a shriek that pierced straight through me. The doors fought to shut against it, trembling against its grip. I threw my weight against the panel, slamming the close door button until my finger ached. The elevator whined, then clamped shut, severing the thing's grasp with a final metallic snap. Darkness swallowed the hall beyond. The elevator dropped. I pressed myself against the far wall, every nerve screaming, the smell of rust and rot still thick in my throat. The descent felt endless. Every flicker of the light overhead had me flinching, expecting to see that thing crawling inside with me. Finally, with a lurch, the door slid open. The lobby. The normal lobby. I stumbled out, legs unsteady, sucking in the antiseptic-scented air like it was salvation, but the relief didn't last. When I looked back at the elevator, the doors were still open, and inside, just for a moment, I swore I saw a pale hand pressed flat against the back wall, fingers twitching against the steel before fading into nothing. I walked the rest of the night. No more shortcuts, no more temptation. But the rules weren't just words anymore. They were chains, and I had yanked one loose. The hospice all was changed. After 3 a.m., the air grew denser, halls longer, shadows thicker. Every step carried a hush that pressed against the ears, a silence too deliberate to be natural. But it was after 4 that the real danger began. Rule number 6 was clear. Do not let anyone in after 4 a.m., no matter how much they beg. I had read it dozens of times, the ink heavy on the paper, as if the writer pressed harder for emphasis. I had never questioned it until Sam. He was restless that night, pacing the nurse's station like a caged animal. Ms. Keene sat stiff in her chair, her knitting needles clacking steadily, the rhythm sharp enough to cut through the silence. I was filing charts when it began. The knock. It was faint at first, like someone testing the strength of the door, then harder, fists pounding against the glass in desperate rhythm. "Help!" a voice cried, muffled by the thick steel. "Please! Someone help me!" I froze, breath caught in my throat. My gaze flicked to the clock. 1 Vesfian. A.M. Sam was already moving. "Wait!" I hissed. "You know the rule." But he ignored me, striding down the hall with long, purposeful steps. The pounding grew louder, frantic. I followed despite myself, each beat of my heart echoing the fists against the glass. At the entrance, a man stood silhouetted by the security light outside. His clothes were torn, face smeared with dirt and blood. He pressed both palms against the glass, eyes wild. "Please?" His voice cracked, ragged from screaming. "They're after me. Please let me in." Sam's hand was already on the bolt. "Don't," I whispered. My voice shook. "Sam, don't. It's past 4. He looked at me, jaw set. "What if it was you out there?" "That's not the point. You know the rule." He shook his head. "These rules, who even wrote them? Ms. Keene, some nurse from 30 years ago? Maybe they're just fear tactics. Maybe they're bullshit." The man outside slammed his fist again, leaving a streak of red on the glass. His eyes locked on mine, and for a moment I thought I saw something shift behind them. A flicker of black. "Sam," I said, voice breaking. "Please don't." But the bolt slid free. The door swung open. The man stumbled inside, collapsing to his knees. His chest heaved, breath rattling like broken glass. Sam bent to help him, muttering reassurances. That was when the smell hit me. Rot, damp earth, and rusted iron, thick and clinging. The man's head jerked up, his mouth stretched wide, wider than flesh should allow, until the corners split. His face warped, skin rippling like wet clay. And then he split, not like tearing. Fabric like a shadow breaking apart, fragmenting into jagged shards of black. The thing collapsed and multiplied, dozens of figures uncoiling from its core. Each fragment twitched, limbs too long, faces unfinished. They swarmed around Sam in a blur of motion. He screamed. The sound ripped through the hall, high and raw. He thrashed, but the shadows crawled over him, digging into skin, pulling him apart not by flesh but by essence, like they were unraveling him from the inside. I stumbled back, my own scream trapped in my throat. The wall shuddered, lights flickered red-black, and the smell grew stronger, choking. Sam's eyes found mine, wide and pleading, before the mass swallowed him whole. His last scream echoed as the fragments dragged him into the darkness beyond the threshold, and then silence. The door hung open. The hall was empty. My breath came in ragged bursts. My ears rang with the memory of his cries. I wanted to run, to hide, but my legs were locked. Behind me, Ms. Keene's voice cut through the air, cold and flat. "I told you, Never open the door. I turned, shaking. He thought he was helping. Intentions don't matter. She rose from her chair, her shadow long against the wall. Rules matter, that's all. Rules keep the line. Break them, and the line breaks you. Her words were final, sharp as nails in a coffin. I looked back at the door, half expecting Sam to stumble through, broken but alive. Nothing. Only the faint outline of a handprint smeared against the glass. By the time dawn came, the handprint was gone, but the echo of his scream stayed, burned into the walls of my skull. After Sam was gone, the hospice fell into a silence that didn't belong to any place meant for the living. The air seemed heavier, every light dimmer than before. Even Ms. Keene's knitting had stopped, her needles resting on her lap like twin bones. But what unsettled me most wasn't the silence. It was the paper, the rules sheet. I'd folded it into my pocket hours earlier, more out of superstition than practicality. I'd pulled it out countless times before, tracing each word with my finger as if memorization alone could keep me safe. But that night, after Sam's scream had carved itself into me, the paper felt different, heavier, damp almost, though my hands were dry. When I unfolded it, the words were wrong. The first few rules looked familiar enough, though the ink bled faintly at the edges, like fresh writing that hadn't fully dried. Rule number 1. Always start rounds at midnight sharp. Rule number 2. Never leave the lights off in the east wing. Rule number 3. Do not respond to voices that sound like yours. But then the letters wavered, the ink smudged and rearranged, curling into lines that hadn't been there before. New rules. Rule number 10. If you see the lights flicker 3 times, hide under a bed. Rule number 11. If you hear your name twice in a row, don't move until silence returns. Rule number 12. The doors to floor 3 may open again. Do not go inside. My pulse roared in my ears. I counted the lines again. The list was longer now, not just 12 rules, 13, 14, more forming at the bottom as I stared, as though the paper itself was writing in real time. I slammed it shut, shoving it into my pocket, but the words were already there, burned into me. The rules weren't fixed. They were alive, and worse, they were adapting. When I told Ms. Keene, she didn't look surprised. That happens, she said, voice flat. It means the hospice is shifting. I blinked at her, throat dry. Shifting? She met my gaze, her eyes glassy and unreadable. The rules are a reflection. They don't protect us from change. They change with what's needed. If they didn't, none of us would last the week. The way she said it chilled me, as if she'd seen the paper rewrite itself 100 times already. I wanted to ask more, to demand how many shifts she'd endured. But then the lights above us flickered once, twice. I froze. The third flicker snapped through the hall like a shutter slamming shut. My hand went to my pocket before I could think, dragging out the paper, scanning frantic. There it was. Rule 10 already waiting for me. If you see the lights flicker 3 times, hide under a bed. I didn't question it. My body moved on instinct, dropping to the ground and scrambling beneath the nearest patient's bed. Dust coated my mouth, the air hot and stale. The patient above wheezed in shallow breaths, unaware of me crouched in the dark beneath them. The hall went silent. Something heavy shuffled past. The sound wasn't footsteps, not exactly. Too slow, too dragging, as though weight was being pulled instead of carried. My chest tightened. Every instinct begged me to peek, but I clenched my eyes shut. A wet noise followed, like something dragging its nails down a slab of meat. The patient above me stirred, groaning faintly. I bit my knuckle to keep from crying out. The thing paused. For a moment I swore I felt its attention on me, like heat pressing against the underside of the bed. My lungs screamed for air, but I didn't dare inhale. And then, after an eternity of stillness, the dragging shuffled away. The lights steadied. Only when I crawled out, trembling, did I see the smear it left behind. A streak of dark red along the linoleum, leading nowhere. I folded the rule sheet again with shaking hands, but the ink was already shifting. The bottom line warped and reformed, a fresh command etching itself onto the paper like a wound. Rule 13. Do not follow the blood. The bile rose in my throat. This wasn't a guide anymore. It was a conversation. Something inside this hospice was watching me, writing rules as traps, or as warnings. I couldn't tell which. And if the rules could change, then they could lie. Room 9 was supposed to be empty. I knew it because I had checked the census sheet 3 times before rounds. 8 occupied rooms, 2 under renovation, and 1, room 9, sealed off entirely. The key on my ring was rusted, the tag cracked with age. I wasn't supposed to open it. But the door was already ajar. The strip of light spilling into the hallway felt wrong, pale and thick, like diluted milk. I hesitated, clutching the rule sheet in my pocket. It pulsed against my hand as though waiting to be drawn. Part of me wanted to walk away to pretend I hadn't seen it. But fatigue does strange things, and curiosity is its cruelest partner. I pushed the door open. The bed inside was occupied. At first I thought it was just another patient, a thin figure lying beneath a sheet, oxygen tubing draped across their face. The heart monitor beside them flickered a lazy rhythm. Everything about the scene was ordinary, except the face. It was mine. I froze in the doorway, the air knocked from my chest. The figure on the bed was pale, fragile, hollow-eyed, like a version of me already weeks into death. Their lips moved faintly, whispering, though the hiss of oxygen muffled the woods. I stepped closer, each footfall echoing too loud. My reflection, the other me, turned their heads slowly, as if they had been waiting. Their eyes met mine. Finally, they rasped. The voice was mine, but not rougher, used. As though it had been echoing in a cavern for years before reaching me, I gripped the doorframe until my knuckles ached. You're not real. The other. Me smiled faintly. Neither are you. The heart monitor ticked on, steady. My stomach knotted. They raised a trembling hand, gesturing weakly. Come closer. You need to hear this. You've been following the rules, but you don't know why they exist. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my body betrayed me, dragging me toward the bed as though pulled on a string. The doppelganger's breath rattled. This place isn't what you think. It isn't a hospice. Not really. It's filter, a boundary, and you're just the caretaker, passing the time until the words blurred, slipping into static. I leaned in despite myself, straining to catch them. Their breath was hot against my ear. What? Until it's your turn. I jerked back, heart slamming against my ribs. The sheet in my pocket buzzed like a live wire. I yanked it out, desperate for grounding, for guidance. New words were already scrawling themselves across the paper. Rule 14. Do not listen to what lies in room 9. Too late. The other me was sitting up now, the tubes falling away. Their eyes gleamed wet and feverish. They don't want you to know. That's why the rules keep changing. Every time you obey, you tighten the chains around yourself. I backed toward the door, shaking my head. Their smile widened, teeth flashing too sharp in the pale light. Let me take your place, just for a little while. You don't have to keep obeying. You don't have to suffer. I'll do it for you. The stati, way they said it, the same cadence, the same inflection as my own inner voice, made bile rise in my throat. I turned to run, but when I glanced back, the bed was empty. No tubes, no wires, no dent in the pillow. Just blank sheets pulled taut. I stumbled into the hall, clutching the rule sheet like a holy relic. The corridor seemed longer than before, the lights stretching into infinity. Behind me, faintly, I thought I heard my own footsteps following, half, a beat behind. When I reached the nurse's station, Ms. Keene was waiting, her knitting needles clicking softly. She didn't look up when she spoke. You saw them, didn't you? My throat tightened. Saw who? She threaded a loop, her fingers steady. Yourself. Happens to everyone eventually. I wanted to scream at her, to demand, why no one had warned me, but the words stuck in my chest. Instead, I unfolded the paper again. The ink was still shifting, bleeding into another new line. Rule Pattern 15. Do not trade places, no matter how much they beg. I crumpled the sheet in my fist, bile burning my throat. The rules weren't protection anymore. They were confession. A record of all the ways others had failed, and now the hospice had shown me my own failure waiting. For me in room 9, my future had a face, and it wore my own. The night began like any other. Rules stacked in my pocket, routine etched into muscle memory, fatigue dragging at every movement. I thought I could survive another shift if I just clung to the pattern, but patterns don't matter when the system itself decides to break. It started with the mirrors. Every one of them, sheets that had stayed fixed for weeks, were suddenly slipping free. I was halfway down the east wing when I noticed fabric pooled on the floor, mirror bare and glistening, then another, then another. By the time I reached the nurse's station, 5 reflective surfaces were exposed, their glass vibrating faintly, like skin stretched too tight. Each reflection was wrong. In one I was walking away even though I stood still. In another, I was already at the station, head bent as though writing. In the third, I wasn't there at all. The air itself felt stretched, tugged between versions of me I couldn't control. I yanked the rule sheet out. New lines were writing themselves so fast the ink bled. Cover them, don't look, don't trust, don't stop moving, but there weren't enough sheets to cover all of them anymore. The hospice had too many eyes. That's when the lights went. Not all at once, flickers first. The overhead fluorescence stuttered in rapid bursts, the hall plunging into strobe. Each blackout lasted half a second too long, long enough for me to notice movement where no one should be. Patients standing in doorways who weren't assigned to those rooms. Shadows bending forward as though crawling across the ceiling. The third flicker lasted 5 seconds. I held my breath. When the lights snapped back, every patient door was open. Monitors beeped in chaotic unison, alarms shrieking. But the beds were empty. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The rule sheet nearly tore in my grip as new words bled across the page. Do not call their names. Do not count them. Do not run. I tried to breathe, but the air had changed, thicker, metallic like rusted blood, my ears filled with static. Beneath it, faintly, a chorus of voices rose. They were chanting something. My name, again and again, braided into a rhythm that scraped against my nerves. Then I heard the footsteps, not just one set, hundreds, bare soles slapping tile, synchronized. The sound filled the corridor before I saw them, the patients, every one of them, emerging from doorways in unnatural unison. Their movements were too smooth, arms swinging like pendulums, heads tilted at the same angle, and their eyes white, all white. They advanced together, silent except for the thunder of feet. I backed into the station, pulling drawers open, searching for anything, sheets, tape, scissors, anything to cover the mirrors or block the doors. My fingers brushed the handle of the wall clock I had hidden days ago. For one split second, I saw the reflection in its glass. Me, grinning, hand already pressed against the other side. The patients drew closer. Then the intercom crackled. "Staff, please report to floor 3. The voice wasn't human. It was stretched, pitched wrong, syllables wobbling like warped tape. I slammed the intercom switch down, but the voice bled through every speaker in the building, repeating the call. Floor 3, floor 3, floor 3. There was no floor 3. I remembered the elevator, the broken rule, the crawling figure on all fours. My stomach turned. The chanting grew louder, and the patients stopped just feet away, forming a semicircle around me. Their mouths opened in perfect unison, but no sound came out. The voices were still there, though, in my head, vibrating through. Bone. The rule sheet quivered in my hand. The ink blurred until the paper went black, words burning through in jagged white. Do not listen. Do not obey. For the first time, The rules contradicted themselves. I dropped the sheet, bile rising in my throat. The patients lurched forward. I bolted down the west wing, dodging open doors, ignoring the reflections that jerked and writhed in every shard of glass. The fluorescent strobed so hard my vision blurred, and in the gaps of darkness, the patients appeared closer than they should have been, jerking ahead like bad film cuts. Somewhere behind me, I heard Sam shouting, though his voice was swallowed by static. I turned a corner, nearly colliding with him. His face was pale, slick with sweat. "They're everywhere," he gasped. "Rules don't work anymore." We both froze as Ms. Keene stepped into view from the opposite hall, calm as ever, her knitting needles still in her hands. But her eyes were black pits now, wide and endless. She spoke in a voice that wasn't hers. "Containment is failing." The walls shuddered. Cracks splintered up the plaster, red light bleeding through like veins glowing beneath skin. The air grew hotter, pressing down on us with every breath. Sam grabbed my arm. "We have to get out." But where was out? The hospice stretched endlessly, corridors looping back on themselves. Every turn looked the same, and every reflective surface now carried my smiling twin, waiting, pressing closer. The patients followed. In silence, hundreds of them, their bare feet slapping like a war drum. I pulled Sam down a side hall, lungs burning. At the far end, the fire exit gleamed faintly. A way out. We sprinted. The door stood open, night air bleeding in until it wasn't night. Beyond the threshold was only more corridor, stretching forever. Sam cursed, slamming the frame. "It's folding us in. The whole place is—" A hand shot through the doorway. Not a patient's hand. Mine. It clamped onto Sam's arm, nails digging in, and another me pulled itself through the opening, grin splitting ear to ear. More followed. Versions of me peeling out of walls, dripping from ceilings, clawing up from beneath the tile. Each face carried the same wide smile, teeth gleaming too sharp. Sam screamed as one dragged him down, pulling him into the floor as if it were water. His body sank inch by inch, thrashing, eyes wild. His last look before disappearing was accusation, as though I could have saved him. Then he was gone. The chanting hit a fever pitch, rattling my skull. The patients closed in, the air choking with heat and metal. Every mirror surface now bulged. Outward, my reflection pressing closer, grinning wider, waiting to replace me. The rule sheet fluttered at my feet. I grabbed it, desperate for something, anything. The paper was blank, and then, slowly, words burned across in fresh ink, jagged and final. No rules, not anymore. The hospice convulsed. Lights exploded, glass rained down, walls split wide to reveal the red glow beneath. From somewhere deep below, something roared, low, guttural, endless. And I understood. The rules had never been to protect us. They were locks, and every broken rule, every crack, had weakened the chains holding something vast and ancient at bay. Now, with the system unraveling, there was nothing left to hold it back. The night had collapsed, and I was standing at the center of the breach.